The dragons of Velroth Prime had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They were proud creatures, each one as large as a human building, with scales that shone like polished metal and eyes that burned with ancient fire. They had conquered star systems. They had defeated empires. They feared nothing in the known universe until the sickness came. Elder Corvath stood at the window of her crystal tower and watched the rain fall on her dying world. She was old, even by dragon standards. Her silver scales had seen the rise and fall of 100 civilizations. But in all her long years, she had never felt fear like this. The plague had started 3 months ago. A mining ship had disturbed an ancient asteroid, and something had woken up inside it. Something the long-dead Hurricane species had left behind as a final curse to the universe. A weapon designed to kill slowly, painfully, and without mercy. It attacked only the young. 47 hatchlings now lay in the healing caverns below the city. Their scales were turning gray. Their inner fire was dying. The healers had tried everything. Nothing worked. The sickness learned from every treatment and became stronger. Corvath closed her eyes and felt the weight of her failure. She was supposed to protect her people. She was supposed to be wise. But wisdom meant nothing against an enemy that could not be fought with claws or fire. The door behind her opened. Rin entered, her young emerald scales still bright with health. She was the youngest member of the council, barely 500 years old, and she still believed in impossible things. "Elder," Rin said softly, "I have found something. Another failed cure?" "No, another option." Rin paused, and Corvath could hear the hesitation in her voice. "The humans." Corvath turned slowly. "The humans," she repeated, as if the word tasted strange. "Yes, I have been reading their medical files. Their history. They are not like us, Elder. They are soft and weak, and they die so quickly. But they have survived things that should have killed them 100 times over. They are primitives," Corvath said. "They discovered space travel only 3 centuries ago. They still fight among themselves over land and resources. They also cured diseases that killed millions of their own kind. They created medicines from mold and poisons. They cut open their own bodies to fix what was broken inside." Rin stepped closer, her eyes bright with desperate hope. "They do not fight problems the way we do. They trick them. They find weaknesses where none should exist." Corvath was silent for a long moment. The rain continued to fall outside her window. In the caverns below, 47 children were dying. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Send the request," she said finally. "Ask the humans for help." The message traveled across the stars at the speed of light. It passed through relay stations and communication networks. It bounced off satellites and slipped through wormholes. And finally, it arrived on a small blue planet called Earth. Park. Dohan was asleep at his desk when his phone rang. He was 34 years old, a researcher at a hospital in Dizin, and he had been awake for almost 40 hours before his body finally gave up. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. His computer screen still showed the data he had been analyzing before sleep took him. The phone rang again. Dohan groaned and reached for it without opening his eyes. "What?" he said. The voice on the other end was calm and official. It belonged to someone from the government. Someone important. Dohan did not care. He wanted to sleep, but then the voice said something that made him sit up straight. "Dragons," Dohan repeated. "You are telling me that dragons are real, and they need a doctor." "A researcher," the voice corrected. "Someone who specializes in adaptive pathogens. Your name came up. Your work on bacteriophages impressed certain people." "What people?" "The kind of people who know about dragons." Dohan rubbed his eyes and tried to think. He had spent his whole career studying diseases that learned and changed and evolved. It was thankless work. Nobody cared about bacteriophages. Nobody cared about the tiny invisible wars being fought inside human bodies every day. And now dragons wanted his help. "When do I leave?" he asked. 12 hours later, Doan stood in a shuttle that was taking him to another planet. He had packed one duffel bag. Inside it were clothes, research equipment, and a small vial containing his life's work. He called her Lucy. She was a bacteriophage he had been developing for years, a tiny predator designed to hunt and kill the most dangerous bacteria known to medicine. He had no idea if she would work on dragons. He had no idea what he was walking into. But Doan had learned long ago that the best way to solve a problem was to look at it up close. The shuttle landed on Velrath, prime as the sun was setting. The sky was purple and orange, and the clouds looked like they were made of gold. Doan barely noticed. He was too busy staring at the welcome committee. 12 dragons stood before him in a perfect line. Each one was enormous. Their scales caught the fading light and threw it back in 1,000 colors. Their eyes were like furnaces, burning with heat and ancient intelligence. They looked at Doan the way a human might look at an insect. Korvath stood at the front. She was the largest of them all, her silver scales marked with the scars of countless battles. She had expected many things from the humans. A team of scientists, perhaps. A military escort. A show of strength. Instead, she received one small man in a wrinkled coat, holding a bag and a thermos. "This is the help you send us?" Taryn demanded. She was the chief healer, her bronze scales rippling with anger. "One creature? One soft, fragile creature?" Doan looked up at her. He did not seem afraid. He did not seem impressed. He simply looked tired, like a man who had seen too many problems and solved too many puzzles to be bothered by something as simple as size. "You asked for someone who could help," he said. His voice was calm and quiet. "I am here to help. So stop complaining and show me your sick kids." The dragons stared at him. No one had ever spoken to them like that. No one had ever dared. Korvath felt something stir in her ancient heart. It was not anger. It was not offense. It was something she had not felt in a very long time. It was hope. "Follow me," she said, and led the human into the darkness below. The healing caverns were carved deep into the mountain, lit by crystals that glowed with soft blue light. The air was warm and smelled of smoke and medicine. Doan walked through the entrance and stopped. He had seen many terrible things in his career. He had walked through hospitals during outbreaks. He had watched patients fight for their lives against diseases that had no names. But nothing had prepared him for this. The hatchlings lay in rows, each one held inside a glowing field of energy that kept them stable. They were small by dragon standards, only the size of cars or trucks, but they were still magnificent creatures. Their scales should have been bright with color. Their eyes should have been burning with the fire that all dragons carried inside them. Instead, they were gray and dull and fading. Doan counted them as he walked. 47 young dragons, some barely old enough to fly, trapped between life and death. The youngest had hatched only last season. Their scales were supposed to be pink, but now they looked like Taer and walked beside him, her bronze scales tight with tension. She did not like this human. She did not trust him. But she was a healer, and her patients were dying, so she swallowed her pride and answered his questions. "The pathogen attacks their fire glands," she explained. "It spreads through their blood and feeds on the heat they produce. The more they fight it, the faster it grows." Doan nodded, his eyes never leaving his tablet. He was scanning everything, recording everything, building a picture in his mind of the enemy he faced. How long do they have? Days, perhaps a week for the strongest. Taryn's voice cracked slightly. "We have tried everything. Every medicine. Every treatment. Every technique our ancestors discovered over 10,000 years. Nothing works. Because the pathogen learns, Dowan said. It was not a question. Terrence stared at him. How did you know? It is what the Hurricane were famous for. Dowan finally looked up from his tablet. His eyes were sharp and focused, all tiredness gone. They made biological weapons that could think. Weapons that could adapt. They were very good at making things that killed. You know of the Hurricane? I read about them on the flight here. They died out 100,000 years ago, killed by their own creations. Dowan smiled, but there was no humor in it. They made the perfect weapon. So perfect that it eventually turned on them. Funny how that works. He walked to the nearest hatchling and knelt beside the stasis field. The young dragon inside was barely breathing. His scales were the color of sunset, but the color was fading fast. What is his name? Dowan asked. Terran hesitated. Solvin. He was the first to get sick. Hello, Solvin, Dowan said softly. I am going to help you. But I need you to hold on a little longer. Can you do that for me? The hatchling did not respond. He was too deep in sickness to hear. But Dowan spoke to him anyway, because that was what humans did. They talked to the dying. They refused to treat them like objects. Terran watched this strange little creature with his soft skin and his gentle voice, and she felt her hatred begin to crack. You care about them, she said. Why? They are not your children. They are not even your species. Dowan stood up and looked at her. When I was a child, he said, I was very sick. A disease attacked my lungs, and the doctors said I would die. But there was one nurse who refused to give up. She stayed with me every night. She talked to me even when I could not hear. She fought for me when everyone else had stopped fighting. He paused, remembering. I lived because one person refused to let me die. That is what humans do. We fight for each other. We fight for strangers. We fight for anyone who needs us. He gestured at the dying hatchlings around them. These children need someone to fight for them. So, here I am. Terran was silent for a long moment. Then she bowed her great head, a gesture of respect that dragons rarely gave to anyone. What do you need? She asked. Show me everything you have tried. Every treatment, every medicine, every failure. I need to understand how the pathogen thinks. For the next 6 hours, Terran walked Dowan through the complete history of their battle against the plague. She showed him data and scans and research that had taken her team months to compile. She explained the biology of dragons, the nature of their inner fire, the complex systems that kept them alive. Dowan listened and asked questions and took notes. He did not interrupt. He did not dismiss anything as unimportant. He treated Terran as an equal, a colleague, a fellow healer fighting the same war dog. By the time they finished, the sun had risen outside the mountain. Dowan had not slept. He had not eaten, but his eyes were brighter than ever, and his mind was working faster than Terran had ever seen any creature think. I understand now, he said finally. I understand why nothing has worked. Tell me. You have been fighting this disease like dragons, with power and force and overwhelming strength. You throw your best weapons at it, and when those fail, you throw bigger weapons. Dowan shook his head. But this pathogen was designed to beat that strategy. It expects you to fight with strength. It learns from your attacks and grows stronger. Terran felt her heart sink. Then, what can we do? Dowan reached into his bag and pulled out a small vial. Inside was something that looked alive, swimming in clear liquid. We stop fighting like dragons, he said. And we start fighting like humans. What is that? Her name is Lucy. She is a bacteriophage, a virus that kills bacteria. Dowan held the vial up to the light. Humans discovered a long time ago that the best way to fight tiny enemies is with other tiny enemies. We do not beat diseases with strength. We beat them with cleverness. We find something that wants to eat them, and we let nature do the work. Terran stared at the vial. You want to infect our children with another disease? I want to give your children an ally. Something that will hunt the Harokin pathogen and destroy it from the inside. Doan met her eyes. It is not elegant. It is not powerful. But it might work. And right now, that is all that matters. Terran looked at the vial. Then at the dying children around her. Then back at the strange little human who had traveled across the stars to save creatures he had never met. Do it, she said. Doan worked without stopping. The first day passed, and he did not sleep. The second day passed, and he did not eat. By the third day, the dragons who watched him began to wonder if humans were truly as fragile as they had believed. He had set up a small laboratory in the corner of the healing cavern. His equipment looked simple and crude compared to the gleaming dragon technology around it, but his hands moved with a speed and precision that no machine could match. He talked to himself constantly, muttering numbers and theories and half-formed ideas. Sometimes he argued with his tablet as if it could answer back. The dragons did not understand what he was doing. They watched him inject samples into tiny dishes. They watched him study results that made no sense to them. They watched him fail again and again, curse softly in his human language, and immediately try something new. Yuna was the first dragon to approach him. She was young, barely 300 years old, with scales the color of deep ocean water. She had volunteered to be his assistant because no one else wanted the job. The older dragons thought helping a human was beneath their dignity. Yuna did not care about dignity. She cared about the hatchlings dying in the stasis fields around her. You should rest, she said on the second night. Even humans need sleep. Doan did not look up from his work. Later, you said that 6 hours ago, and I will say it again in 6 more hours. He squinted at his screen, made a small adjustment to something Yuna could not see, and kept working. The pathogen is adapting faster than I expected. Every time Lucy gets close to winning, it changes its strategy. It is like playing chess against an opponent who can see 10 moves ahead. Yuna settled down beside him, her massive body curling around his tiny workspace like a protective wall. How do you beat an opponent like that? You cheat. Doan finally looked at her, and she saw how tired he really was. His eyes were red and sunken. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady and determined. You stop playing their game and make them play yours instead. What does that mean? It means I need to stop trying to kill the pathogen directly. It is too smart for that. Instead, I need to make it kill itself. He rubbed his eyes and took a long drink from his cold coffee. The Harokin designed this thing to be perfect. But perfect things have a weakness. They cannot imagine being anything other than what they are. They cannot adapt to the truly unexpected. Yuna did not fully understand, but she nodded anyway. How can I help? Doan smiled at her. It was a real smile, tired but warm, and it made Yuna feel something strange in her chest. She had never seen a human smile before. She had not known they could look so kind. Keep me company, he said. Tell me about your world. Tell me about your people. I work better when I am not alone. So Yuna talked? She told him about the dragon homeworld, about the crystal cities that floated in the clouds, about the ancient songs that her people sang to welcome the sunrise. She told him about her family, her dreams, her fears. She told him things she had never told anyone, because somehow this small, exhausted human felt safe. And Doan listened. He listened while he worked, while he failed, while he tried again. He asked questions that showed he was paying attention. He laughed at her jokes. He looked sad when she described the friends she had lost to the plague. On the third night, Yuna asked him the question that had been burning inside her. Why are you doing this? You do not owe us anything. Your people do not even like us. We have ignored you for centuries. We called you primitives and animals. Why did you come to help us?" Do-hwan was silent for a long time. His hands continued to work, but his eyes were distant, looking at something far away. "When humans first reached the stars," he said finally, "we thought we would find friends. We thought the universe would be full of creatures like us, creatures who wanted to connect and share and learn together. But everywhere we went, we found only emptiness. Dead worlds. Extinct species. Silence." He paused, adjusting something on his equipment. "For 100 years, we searched. And we found nothing. We began to believe that we were alone. That we would always be alone. That the universe was a cold and empty place that did not care about us. And then you found us," Yuna said softly. "And then we found you. And the Valorians, and the Corinthians, and 100 other species. And yes, you ignored us. Yes, you looked down on us. Yes, you treated us like children." Do-hwan finally looked at her, and his tired eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "But you existed. You were real. We were not alone anymore." He took a shaky breath. "That is why I am here. Because you are our neighbors. Because your children are sick and you asked for help. Because that is what humans do when someone needs us." He smiled again, that strange warm smile. "We help, even when we are tired. Even when we are scared. Even when no one thanks us. We help." Yuna felt her heart break a little. She had been taught her whole life that humans were primitive, weak, unimportant. But this creature beside her had traveled across the stars to save children he had never met. He was destroying his own body to find a cure that might not exist. He was fighting a battle that was not his because he believed it was the right thing to do. Maybe humans were weak. Maybe they were primitive. But they were also something else, something the dragons had never seen before. They were brave in ways that had nothing to do with claws or fire. "I will stay with you," Yuna said, "until this is over. I will not leave you alone." Do-hwan nodded and went back to work. And Yuna stayed beside him, watching and waiting and hoping, as the long night continued around them. On the morning of the 4th day, Lucy began to win. The first hatchling to wake was Solvin. Do-hwan was checking the stasis field readings when the young dragon's eyes suddenly opened. They were cloudy at first, confused, like someone waking from a very deep sleep. Then the cloudiness cleared, and Solvin looked directly at the human standing beside him. His first instinct was to bite. Do-hwan pulled, his hand back just in time. Solvin's tiny teeth snapped shut on empty air, and the hatchling made an annoyed sound that was half growl and half whine. "He is hungry," Taryn said from across the cavern. Her voice was shaking. "He is hungry and angry and confused. He is healthy." Do-hwan laughed. It was a strange sound, exhausted and relieved and slightly crazy. He had not slept in 4 days. He had not eaten properly in 3. His body was running on nothing but coffee and stubbornness. But none of that mattered now. Solvin was alive. One by one, the other hatchlings began to wake. Their scales brightened. Their inner fires flickered back to life. They complained and demanded food, and tried to bite anyone who came too close. They were loud and annoying and absolutely wonderful. Yuna wept. She did not know dragons could cry until tears were running down her own face. All around her, the healers were embracing each other, roaring with joy, celebrating in ways that dragons had not celebrated in centuries. Taryn walked through the chaos and stopped in front of Do-hwan. She was crying too, her bronze scales wet with tears she had never expected to shed. "You did it," she said. "You saved them all." Do-hwan shook his head. "Lucy did the hard work. I just pointed her in the right direction. Do not be modest. You are terrible at it." Taryn did something that shocked everyone watching. She lowered her great head and pressed her nose gently against Do-hwan's chest. It was a gesture of love and gratitude, reserved only for family. "Thank you, human. Thank you for my children." Do-hwan patted her nose awkwardly. He did not know the right way to respond to dragon affection. But he was smiling, and that was enough. Elder Korvath arrived to see the celebration for herself. She had stayed away during the long nights of work, not wanting to interfere or add pressure. But now she walked through the healing caverns with tears in her ancient eyes. Watching children she had thought lost, forever playing and fighting and causing trouble. "You have given us a miracle," she said to Do-hwan. "The dragon herds will never forget what you have done." "It was not a miracle," Do-hwan said. "It was just science. And stubbornness. Mostly stubbornness." Korvath laughed, a deep rumbling sound that shook the crystal walls. "Then your stubbornness is a gift to us all." The celebration continued for hours. The dragons feasted and sang, and told stories of the human who had crossed the stars to save their children. Do-hwan was given food that was too large for him to eat, and drinks that were too strong for him to drink. He smiled and accepted everything, and quietly poured the drinks away when no one was looking. He was exhausted. He wanted to sleep for a week. But he was also happy in a way he had not felt in years. He had made a difference. He had saved lives. That was why he had become a researcher in the first place. The happiness lasted until the evening. Rin was the first to collapse. She was in the middle of speaking when her legs suddenly gave out beneath her. Her emerald scales, which had been so bright with joy, began to turn gray. Then Korvath fell. Then a dozen council members. Do-hwan watched in horror as the plague swept through the adult dragons like fire through dry grass. It was faster now, more aggressive, more deadly. The Hurricane pathogen had learned from its defeat. It had evolved. And now it was killing the grown dragons with a speed that made the hatchling infections look gentle. "It jumped," Taryn said, her voice hollow with shock. "It adapted to survive Lucy, and then it jumped to new hosts. It is attacking the adults now." Do-hwan ran to Korvath's side. The great silver dragon was struggling to breathe, her ancient body fighting against an enemy it could not defeat. Her eyes found Do-hwan, and for the first time, he saw fear in them. "The children," she whispered. "Protect the children." "I will protect everyone," Do-hwan said. "I am not done fighting yet." He turned to Taryn. "How long do we have?" "Hours. A day at most for the strongest. The pathogen has become much more aggressive. It knows it is in a war now, and it is trying to win quickly." Do-hwan closed his eyes. He had been awake for over 100 hours. His body was screaming for rest. His mind was foggy with exhaustion. Every part of him wanted to collapse, to give up, to admit that he had done enough. But then he remembered his grandmother. She had survived the Korean War as a child, had lost everything and rebuilt her life 3 times over. She used to tell him stories when he was young, stories about impossible odds and impossible victories. "Humans do not give up," she would say. "We are too stubborn to know when we are beaten." Do-hwan opened his eyes. "I need your complete genetic database," he said to Taryn. "Every dragon who has ever lived. I need your fastest computer. I need access to every file you have on the Hurricane. What are you going to do? Find the weakness the Hurricane built into their own weapon." Do-hwan looked at the dying dragons around him, and something hard and determined settled into his face. They were smart enough to be afraid of what they created. That means they built a failsafe. A way to stop it if things went wrong. How can you know that? Because it is what I would do. He turned to Yuna, who was standing nearby with tears still wet on her scales. "I need you to do something for me. Anything. Make me more coffee. A lot more coffee." He managed a weak smile. It is going to be a long night." The dragons watched as the small human went back to his laboratory and began to work again. They watched him push his body past every limit, fighting against sleep and exhaustion and the crushing weight of responsibility. They watched him rage against the dying of the light, and slowly, impossibly, they began to believe that he might actually win. The Harrowkin had been dead for 100,000 years, but their ghosts still haunted the galaxy. Dowan sat in front of the dragon computer system, surrounded by more data than any human had ever seen. The genetic history of an entire species. Medical records spanning 10,000 years. Research files from civilizations that had risen and fallen before humans had learned to use fire. And somewhere in all of it, the answer he needed. "Talk to me," he muttered, scrolling through endless pages of information. "Tell me your secrets." The Harrowkin pathogen was a masterpiece of biological engineering. It could think. It could learn. It could adapt to any attack. But Dowan knew something that the pathogen did not understand. Nothing was truly perfect. Everything had a weakness. The Harrowkin had been brilliant scientists, but they had also been afraid. They had known that their creation might one day turn against them. So they would have built a failsafe, a hidden switch that could shut the whole thing down. Dowan just had to find it. The hours passed. Around him, the adult dragons continued to fade. Korvath had fallen into a coma. Rin was barely breathing. Even Terran, who had seemed so strong, was beginning to show signs of infection. Yuna stayed by Dowan's side, bringing him coffee and water and small pieces of food that he ate without tasting. She did not speak. She knew he needed silence to think. But her presence was a comfort. A reminder that he was not alone in this fight. 18 hours after the adults started dying, Dowan found what he was looking for. It was hidden in the genetic code of the pathogen itself. A sequence that did not match the rest. A fragment of foreign DNA that had no business being there. It looked like garbage code, meaningless noise that any scanner would ignore. But Dowan recognized it. He had seen similar patterns in human viruses, remnants of failed experiments that scientists had abandoned long ago. This was not garbage. This was a key. "I found you," he whispered. The failsafe was elegant in its simplicity. The Harrowkin had designed their weapon to be unstoppable, but they had also given it a blind spot. A specific genetic frequency that the pathogen was programmed to ignore. If Dowan could modify Lucy to carry that frequency, she would become invisible to the enemy's defenses. The pathogen would not be able to adapt, because it would not even know Lucy was there. "This is going to work," Dowan said, mostly to himself. "This is actually going to work." He worked faster than he had ever worked before. His hands moved on their own, guided by years of training and instinct. He modified Lucy's genetic structure, adding the Harrowkin frequency to her core programming. He tested the changes in simulation after simulation, making sure the modification was stable. 4 hours later, he was ready. "Wake up every healer you have," he told Yuna. "We need to treat all the infected adults at the same time. If we do this one at a time, the pathogen might figure out what we are doing and adapt again." Yuna ran to gather the healers. Dowan prepared hundreds of doses of the modified treatment, working until his hands cramped and his vision blurred. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Too many lives depended on him. The treatment was administered just as the sun began to rise outside the mountain. Every infected dragon received their dose within minutes of each other. Then there was nothing left to do but wait. Dowan sat down on the cold stone floor of the healing cavern. He was beyond exhausted. His body felt like it belonged to someone else, a distant machine that had finally run out of fuel. He closed his eyes and waited for the universe to decide if he had won or lost. He must have fallen asleep, because the next thing he knew, Yuna was shaking him awake. "Look," she said, and her voice was trembling. "Dowan, look." He opened his eyes and looked. All around the cavern, the adult dragons were waking up. Their scales were brightening. Their fires were returning. Corvath rose to her feet, shaky but alive, and let out a roar that shook the entire mountain. The plague was gone. Dawan tried to stand, but his legs would not hold him. He collapsed against Corvath's foreclaw, his tablet still clutched in his hands. On the screen was a simple message he had typed before falling asleep. Pathogen neutralized. Full recovery expected. Good night. For 3 days. Dawan slept. Yuna guarded his small body, making sure no one disturbed him. She brought him water when he stirred and covered him with the softest materials she could find. She had never cared for a human before, but she found that it felt natural, even right. When he finally woke, the entire Dragon Council was waiting for him. They stood in the great hall of the Crystal City, hundreds of magnificent creatures who had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. And at the center of them all stood one small human in a wrinkled lab coat, blinking in the bright light. "Dowan," Corvath said, her voice echoing through the hall. "You have done what we thought impossible. You have saved our children and our elders. You have defeated an enemy that destroyed the Harrowkin themselves. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Dawan shifted uncomfortably. He was not used to attention. He was not used to praise. He was just a researcher who had done his job. "Name your price," Corvath continued. "Anything in our power to give. Wealth, land, a seat on our council. Immortality itself, if such a thing can be achieved. Name it, and it is yours." The hall fell silent. Every dragon watched the human, waiting to see what impossible treasure he would demand. Dawan thought for a long moment. He thought about all the things he could ask for. Power, fame, a place in history. 2 things, he said finally. "Name them. First, stop calling humans primitive. We are not. We are just different. We had to learn how to survive without claws or fire or scales. We had to be clever because we could not be strong." He paused. "We have a lot to offer, if you would just give us a chance." Corvath nodded slowly. "And the second?" Dawan looked around the hall at all the dragons who were watching him. Then he smiled, and for just a moment, the dragons caught a glimpse of something dangerous behind his tired eyes. Something that had clawed its way to the stars through ice ages and plagues and the darkness of their own nature. "Next time you need help," he said, "do not wait so long to ask. We are neighbors now. That means something to us." 1 year later, the Galactic Council voted to admit humanity as a full member species. The motion was sponsored by the dragon herds of Valorth Prime. It passed without a single vote against. In his apartment in Bizen, Park Do-hwan watched the announcement on the news. He smiled, shrugged, and went back to his research. Lucy was working well, but he had ideas for improvements. There was always more work to do, more diseases to fight, more lives to save. That was what humans did. After all, they helped, and somewhere in the crystal cities of Valorth Prime, a young dragon named Yuna watched the same announcement. She thought about the strange small creature who had changed everything, and she made a promise to herself. One day, she would visit Earth. One day, she would find Dawan again. One day, she would tell him what his kindness had meant to her people. But for now, she was content to look up at the stars and know that humans were out there, fighting, helping, refusing to give up. They were good neighbors to have.